Donald Trump has extended his deadline for striking Iranian energy plants. The U.S. president says that Iran will now have until April the 6th to open the Strait of Hormuz or face even more destruction. It comes as Israel launches another wave of strikes on Tehran and amid reports that diplomatic talks between the U.S. and Iran are being prepared by intermediary Pakistan. However, Iran has given no direct indication that it is ready for negotiation or compromise.
10 days to capitulate or face 10,000 more troops. Those are the messages coming from Washington as it prepares to both negotiate and escalate its war on Iran. Paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne Division have been ordered to the Gulf region, and another 10,000 could follow soon, U.S. media is reporting. President Donald Trump says Iran could spare itself if it meets his deadlines and demands.
You're talking about a deadline for doing some pretty big damage, even bigger than we've done. We'll see. Look, we have very substantial talks going on with respect to Iran, with the right people.
Trump says he will hold off bombing Iranian energy plants until April 6, giving Tehran more time to reopen the Strait of Hormuz to shipping. U.S. military assets are still steaming towards Iran, including the assault ship, the USS Tripoli, with its aircraft and Marines. Among the possible targets is Karg Island, Iran's oil distribution hub, which the US has already bombed and could seek to occupy. Iran says it will resist any attempt to put foreign boots on its soil. The head of its army ground force inspected his troops, warning a US incursion would be dangerous and costly. State media also repeated Iran's previous threats that it could escalate fighting by closing the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which carries 10% of the world's sea traffic. Iran's Houthi proxy forces in Yemen said they were ready to join the fight.
If developments in the battle require a military response, we will be met with full confidence in God Almighty and reliance upon Him, as in previous rounds.
All the while, the bombing continues, with Israel striking residential buildings in Tehran and elsewhere, killing several people, according to state media. Officials across the Middle East say the death toll from the US-Israeli war now stands at over 3,000 people.
And Simon Mayaban is professor of international politics at the School of Global Affairs in Lancaster. Thank you so much for your time, Simon. Let's begin with Israel's latest wave of strikes on Tehran. I mean, Israel is now threatening to escalate and expand its attacks even further. At the same time, the U.S. appears to be looking for an off-ramp with Iran. Are the U.S. and Israel on the same page in this war?
I think that's the billion-dollar question here. We just don't know to what extent Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump have brought their ideas about what the end goal should be here. We've heard a lot of mixed messages coming out of Washington, coming out of Israel, about what the desired end goal is. But now we're at a point where there seems to be this sort of need for a pragmatic coming together with regard to what is possible right now. With Donald Trump seemingly looking for this off-ramp, Benjamin Netanyahu seemingly not looking for an off-ramp. We'd heard both sides talking about a desire for regime change, Donald Trump then rolling back on that and saying that he wants to have a change of the regime rather than a regime change. So I think there's a real difficulty in ascertaining what the two sides want here. But what we do know is that Benjamin Netanyahu is not quite ready to let up on this war, and it seems that Donald Trump may be about ready to at least start having serious conversations, if not to bring about an end to it.
Let's talk about the prospect of conversations. We're hearing reports that the U.S. and Iran are preparing for direct talks mediated by Pakistan, although we have to say that Iran has denied those claims. What do you read, though, into the prospect of talks? A positive sign?
Yeah, well, I think there always have to be talks, and there have been talks with regard to the US and Iran previously. I think from the Iranian side, there's a great deal of suspicion about talks. We know that back in June 2025, Iran was engaging with talks with the United States about its nuclear program, and the US and Israel bombed Iran. We know that earlier this year, in fact, in February this year, just before the war broke out, the United States and Iran were talking with one another. So that casts a great degree of suspicion over the faith in which Washington is conducting these talks, if indeed there are talks, or at least that's how Iran sees it. The extent to which Washington is actually acting in good faith, or rather, is it just buying time, waiting for the 82nd Airborne to reach the Gulf, waiting for other military assets to reach the Gulf? And so I think there's a good degree of skepticism, a good degree of suspicion amongst many in Tehran. That being said, I would imagine that there are indirect talks going on. There are messages being relayed from both sides to one another so that everyone is aware, look, there is an off-ramp. Whether the United States wants to take Iran's off-ramp and whether Iran wants to take the United States' off-ramp is, of course, a very, very different matter.
And Trump has extended, we know, his deadline for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or face destruction of its energy plants. What do you think happens if that deadline is not met, Simon? I mean, is Trump really ready to follow through on that threat? And is that why these troops are being moved into place?
Quite possibly. I think part of the problem here is that we just don't know what Donald Trump wants to do moving forward. I think we've seen so many flip-flops with regard to Trump's messaging about Iran in the past few weeks that it's difficult to tell purely based on his words and indeed short-term actions. I think it's going to be difficult to predict until we actually see definitive action, because we know that there are divisions within Trump's inner sanctum, inner circle, if you will, of advisors between those who want to escalate and those who want to de-escalate. We know that Trump is feeling the pressure of the markets. We know that the US economy has been hit. The Dow Jones was down dramatically. The price of oil has gone up. So it's clear that the war is affecting the US economy, much like elsewhere. And that, to a businessman like Trump, will be seen in a negative way. But part of me wonders if the threat to destroy Iran's energy plants was indeed just a bluff. We've heard him talk before about causing the most damage ever seen in the history of war, and words to that effect. And it struck me that was potentially the strikes, or the potential strikes on the energy plants, was the next step in his rhetoric, trying to ratchet up the pressure. But if that's the case, Iran has not blinked. Iran has seemingly called his bluff. And so that is also potentially a dangerous step because it backs Trump into a corner. So my hope is that the messages between Washington and Tehran being relayed through Islamabad will find some traction, will manage to get a de-escalation, because Trump backed into a corner risks doing very, very bad things to Iran. And that is something that will take far longer to de-escalate.
Simon, Mayaban, thank you so much. We appreciate your take on all of this.
I want to bring in Tyson Barker. He's a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council in Berlin. Tyson, welcome back to DW. Now, deadline after deadline being extended. What do you read into that?
Well, first of all, I think we should say that this is not unique to this situation for President Trump. He was known for extending deadline after deadline that he had set for Vladimir Putin in Ukraine and for some trade negotiations. So this is a tactic that he has deployed in the past. The signal that he's trying to give is that he thinks that he has found some indirect negotiators that are working in good faith, or at least, something that he can work with constructively based on this present that he received. But generally, I think the United States is also very weary of this war that's going into its second month, and the pain threshold, the tolerance for pain, is a lot lower in the United States than it is for the Iranian regime. And I think there was a great underestimation of the Iranian regime, which has led to the reticence to escalate further.
Donald Trump does, despite all of the factors that you just laid out, keep talking about this war as if Iran has basically already been defeated. From your vantage point, is that anywhere near the truth?
Well, this administration has been inconsistent in its articulation of the objectives of this war. And I think we need to start there because they continue to change. But we can say a couple of objective facts. Iran's military capabilities have been degraded precipitously, and they were able to decapitate the regime leadership. So those are both things that, if they wanted to, they could say are objectives that they were successful in. That said, the regime has seemed to consolidate itself way past the expectations. It has greater control over the Strait of Hormuz and political will to exercise that control than was anticipated. And they've demonstrated themselves willing to attack their neighbors. And their threshold for pain is higher. So in any of those, there's not really a point to declare victory.
Mm-hmm. You said that the U.S. underestimated Iran. Is that still the case? And if so, why did the U.S. not anticipate what was going to be coming their way if they launched this war? A war that, pretty much any analyst you can talk to says is a war of choice.
I mean, I think that it's very obvious the reason that they is because this war was poorly planned. It wasn't done with the kind of due diligence that anyone would expect in this kind of serious conflict, devoting these kind of resources. It didn't have the democratic checks of going through Congress, of messaging to the American people, of trying to make the case for different scenarios within the military about what could arise. The fact that they were willing to admit that the closure of the Strait of Hormuz was something that they didn't anticipate is a massive blind spot. And I think that that's really something that needs to be taken into account, that a lot of this war is based on the consultations with Israel and the euphoria that came from the operation in Venezuela.
How is the U.S. going to adapt its strategy? The Wall Street Journal reported today that the Pentagon was weighing sending 10,000 additional troops to the Middle East.
Well, I don't want to speculate on the purpose of those troops. I mean, some people would think that they might have something to do with occupying the primary island responsible for petroleum production for Iran. But the truth is that the greatest pain point for President Trump and his administration is going to be its deteriorating impact on the global and American economy, and that continues to deteriorate precipitously. So it's really a race against time. How can they get to something that they can declare an objective win and make it convincing and leave Iran and the relationship in a better place, which doesn't seem likely, before really doing some damage to the global economy.
All right, so the U.S. is looking for a way out, and direct negotiations might be coming our way. Where do you see talks going?
It's very hard to predict. I mean, we have heard that Steve Witkoff has a 15-point plan. It sounds like the Iranian regime does not accept that as the basis for negotiations. It sounds like these are very much in their initial phases. There's also the question of what Israel would accept, because they are also a participant in this conflict and have different objectives. And I think their objectives are much more clear. But I think we've got a long ways to go before we see the contours of any kind of end to this conflict.
What you're laying out is a huge miscalculation. Is there a face-saving way out of this for Donald Trump, especially also with an eye on the midterms?
To the degree that there's a face-saving way out, again, the military in Iran has been severely deteriorated, and the regime's leadership has been decapitated. So if they wanted to say that those are two objectives that have been met, they could do so and declare victory and try to find a way to create a groundway for reining in the nuclear program and perhaps, creating more stability for Iran in the region. But it doesn't seem like the greatest thing that Trump has at its disposal is his flexibility itself, that his objectives continue to change. So at any point they could have been met. It all just kind of depends on what those objectives are. And that's clear because he never made the case in a democratic fashion to Congress, to the American people, and to allies about what the objectives of this war are in the first place.
Tyson Barker, we appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.